So hello guys, welcome to the biology class, and today's topic is life processes. So how can you consider whether the living organism is living or not? Suppose a cat is running or a dog is barking. That doesn't mean that they are living, right? I mean that doesn't say all about living beings. That means the movement doesn't say anything. For example, consider the example of virus. When you consider the virus, it is not living outside environment, but when it enters a host cell or the host body, it becomes living, right? So how can you classify organism whether it is living or non-living? By a molecular movements. That means every organism is composed of molecules, and which cannot be seen with our naked eyes, so we can see them with this. So that's about life process, and we will see about how can organism considered to be living. For example, there are various processes that makes the organism, animal or plants makes living. For example, transpiration, respiration, excretion, and how we take in food and transfer energy in our body. All these processes makes a living organism living, and these processes tend to give our body energy by which we can move from one place to another, and that makes the motion one sign of a living creature. So we will see these various processes known as life processes, which will teach us how organisms are living and how the energy is transported in a body to make the movement or any kind of action. Okay, so we will learn one by one. Now suppose if you are doing nothing, absolutely nothing, that means you are just sitting, then that doesn't mean that your body is performing nothing. There are chemical reactions going on inside your body to carry out some of the functions that specifically makes you alive. Okay, and these energy need to be transferred from one body part to other body parts, right? So that every body part should function. Otherwise, if one body part doesn't function, then you cannot move that body part. So we need energy to be transported everywhere inside the body. Now this energy is present in the form of carbohydrates that we get from carbon components from outside the nature, right? Outside the nature. So some of the organisms, that means multicellular organisms, tend to take carbohydrates from the environment. But for example, there are also other creatures that create their own food. That means they are not dependent on the other environment. For example, plants, they are autotrophic in nature. That means they prepare their own food. But in case of animals like us, we tend to depend on these plants for our food, and that helps in nutrition, which gives energy. Now let us study nutrition in plants and animals. Okay, so what do you mean by nutrition? Nutrition means taking in food, digesting it, or breaking down all the complex molecules of food into simpler ones for which enzymes can act in a proper way if the molecules are broken down into simple ones, and so that energy can be transported inside the body in a proper way for the proper functioning of the body. That all belongs to the nutrition part. And nutritions are of two types. One is autotrophic, that is in case of plants, and one is heterotrophic, which is in case of animals. So first we will study this autotrophic nutrition in case of plants, then we will go for heterotrophic nutrition. Okay, now let us see the nutrition in human beings. So this diagram represents our body where nutrition takes place. So this is mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, pancreas, liver, and anus. So this is where the food gets excreted in the form of waste. So let us see how the nutrition takes place, or how the food processing takes place that we eat through our mouth. So first, the food that we eat enters through the mouth. It is necessary that it should enter through mouth. Okay, so basically the food is in the complex form. So our teeth breaks the food particles into smaller particles, and then with the help of salivary glands present, it is mixed thoroughly, right? And now the food is wetted with the saliva so that it gets easier to pass from the esophagus. Okay, so when now these salivary glands secrete enzyme called salivary amylase, which helps the processing of food easily. That means this helps to break the starch easily, and this salivary amylase now breaks down the starch into smaller particles or in smaller components, and now the food passes through esophagus. Now while passing through esophagus, it needs to be pushed down, right? So there is a peristaltic movement which pushes the food down and does not allow it to come back. So with this movement, the food goes down in the stomach. Okay, now in stomach there are gastric glands, and these gastric glands secrete hydrochloric acid, pepsin and mucus. So this hydrochloric acid does the major part of dissolving the food, right? And then this mucus protects the inner lining of the stomach from this hydrochloric acid. Now after processing in the stomach, the food particles are moved further to small intestine, and in small intestine the major part of food processing takes place. That means all the functions takes place, and the food is transferred to small intestine via sphincter. Okay, now we will see how food processing takes place in small intestine, because it is the major portion where maximum of the food get processed and we get all the necessary required nutrients to the body parts. Now when the food enters small intestine, the small intestine is, the length of small intestine differs in various organisms. Like in case of herbivores, like they eat grass, right? So in case of herbivores, the length of small intestine is large, and in case of carnivores, that means the animals or the organisms who eat flesh, meat, etc., right? In that case, the small intestine length is small, because meat is easy to digest, but the plants are difficult. So most of the major part of nutrition takes place in small intestine. Like proteins, carbohydrates and fats are digested in small intestine. Okay, now how they are digested? The bile juice from the liver and pancreatic juice from pancreas, it enters small intestine. Okay, now the major function of bile juice is that the food coming from stomach is in acidic medium, and this acidic medium food needs to be converted into alkaline. So this bile juice converts the acidic medium food, or the food carbohydrates and proteins, into alkaline medium, and it converts it in smaller parts. It has small globules. Okay, now pancreas secretes a protein called, or an enzyme called trypsin. Now what this trypsin does, it converts proteins, carbohydrates into proteins, and lipase converts fats into smaller parts. Okay, now this small intestine has glands. Okay, and these glands secrete intestinal juice, and this intestinal juice again further does three major functions. That is, they convert proteins into amino acids, carbohydrates into glucose, and fatty acids into glycerol. So this is the major function of intestinal juice, whereas trypsin converts it into proteins into smaller parts, and lipase breaks down fats into smaller parts so that enzymes can act on them. Now this small intestine has villi, finger-like projections called villi, and these villi are rich in blood vessels, so that they absorb finally converted food easily and send them to various parts of the body. Okay, now from this, the remaining portion of food, which is waste, it is transferred to large intestine. Now large intestine also absorbs the remaining, which can be absorbed easily, water and other materials, and remaining part is excreted through anus, and this is controlled by a sphincter which is present here. Okay, so all this is about nutrition in human beings. That is, let us recap. Okay, so first the food enters through esophagus. In stomach, with the help of HCl, pepsin and mucus, it is digested, that is, it is broken down, and then via sphincter it is sent to small intestine. In small intestine, there is bile juice coming from liver and pancreatic juice coming from pancreas. So this pancreatic juice has enzyme called trypsin. Now bile juice converts alkaline medium, the food, into alkaline medium, and trypsin breaks down into smaller proteins. Okay, now small intestine has three major functions. With the help of intestinal juice, it converts proteins into amino acids, carbohydrates into glucose, and fatty acids into glycerol. Now this small intestine also has finger like projection called villi, and these villi absorb the final energy components and they transfer it to other parts of the body, and this completes here. With the help of remaining food is transferred to large intestine, that is in the form of waste, and here in large intestine the walls absorb the remaining water and other materials, and the extra food, which is waste, is thrown out. Okay, so this is one of the most important question asked in various exams, and it is always been asked. Okay, so how is glucose broken down into various components in presence of oxygen, lack of oxygen and absence of oxygen? So first, glucose, which contains 6 carbon atoms, is converted to pyruvate, which has 3 carbon atoms and energy. Now this pyruvate is also converted in presence or absence or lack of oxygen in 3 ways. So in absence of oxygen, that is in yeast. Okay, remember this yeast, it is converted into ethanol plus carbon dioxide plus energy. Now this has 2 carbon atoms. And in lack of oxygen, that is in our muscles, it is converted into lactic acid plus energy. So lactic acid has 3 carbon atoms. And finally, in presence of oxygen, that means it takes place in mitochondria. In lack of oxygen, it takes place in our muscles. In absence of oxygen, it takes place in yeast. Okay, so in presence of oxygen, it takes place in mitochondria, and it is converted to carbon dioxide plus water plus energy. So remember these 3 pathways in which glucose is broken down into complex simple molecules. Now let us see how organisms like us respire. So okay, so for respiration, what is necessary is carbon dioxide and oxygen. So basically everyone knows that we take in oxygen and throw out carbon dioxide, but what happens inside, let us see now. So when we take in oxygen, it passes through nostrils. That means we take in oxygen through nostrils and it passes through nasal passage. Now these nostrils are lined with hairs, and also the tract is lined with mucus, so it helps in easy passage and avoiding all the dust particles. So oxygen passes through these tracts with the help in presence of mucus and everything. Now when it passes, there is a ring of cartilage, and this makes it clear that our air tract or the air passing does not collapse. Okay, now when it passes through this, it passes through lungs. These are two lungs. Yeah, now the lungs are divided into bronchi, that is 2 parts, and these bronchi are further divided into bronchioles, and in end there is alveolar sacs which terminate to alveoli. Now this alveoli is the place where the gas exchange takes place, and these alveoli walls have blood vessels, richly blood vessels, which makes sure that the oxygen is taken from alveoli and it is transferred to other parts. Now these same blood vessels take in carbon dioxide from all the parts and give it to alveoli. Now these alveoli have blood vessels, right? So these blood vessels give carbon dioxide to alveoli and they take oxygen. That means there is exchange of carbon dioxide oxygen at the same time. So the blood vessels take oxygen and also give carbon dioxide. So now this carbon dioxide is thrown out and oxygen is given, and the cycle repeats. So remember main thing, that the major exchange or the main exchange of gases takes place at alveoli. So the next is the pumping machine of our body, that is the heart. So basically heart takes in deoxygenated blood and also transfers oxygenated blood. So this takes place in two steps. Okay, so basically heart is composed of this. So it is a rough diagram. You can prefer textbook for the better diagram. So these are various parts, just go through them. So how the blood or the oxygen or the deoxygenated blood is transferred through the lungs and how oxygenated blood is taken into the heart, let's see that. So basically in case of heart, just remember right ventricle, right atrium, left atrium and left ventricle. So this play an important role while transferring. So the first step is that oxygenated rich blood comes in the left atrium, that is here. So when the oxygenated blood comes here, the left atrium obviously expands, right? So like consider the example of injection. So when you suck in, it expands, or you fill up the balloon, so it expands, right? So similarly left atrium expands when the oxygenated rich blood comes here. So when it contracts, it gives blood to left ventricle. Okay, now while left ventricle expands, it takes in from left atrium, and when it contracts, it throws blood out for the rest of the body parts. Now the second step is that deoxygenated blood enters the upper chamber, that is in the right atrium, and when it enters, right atrium expands. That means while expanding, the blood enters in the right atrium. So when the right ventricle dilates, blood transfers it in the right ventricle. So similar in case of this is also similar one. Sorry, it is similar in both the cases, that is when expands it enters here, when contracts it is transferred. So after contracting, blood transfer takes place in the right ventricle and it is thrown out in the lungs for the oxygenation. Okay, so these are the two steps. Remember, oxygenation, that means the blood enters, the oxygenated blood enters in the left ventricle and left atrium, and it is thrown out of the body, thrown to the body parts, and deoxygenated blood is transferred to the lungs via upper or the right atrium and right ventricle. Okay, so this is how pumping takes place. And also remember one thing, if I make a mistake, please do correct me. Okay, so this is all about the pumping of blood. So how does transportation takes place in case of plants? So in case of plants, there are two tissues called xylem and phloem. So xylem basically takes all the water and some of the nutrients, and it transfers to all the parts of the tree. So xylem is a water conducting tissue and phloem is a food conducting tissue. So phloem transfers food and xylem transfers water. So that's all about transportation in plants. Now let us see excretion in human beings and plants. Now let us see how excretion takes place in case of human beings. So this is excretory system, which consists of pair of kidneys, pair of ureters, urinary bladder and urethra. So basically each kidney consists of cluster of thin walled blood capillaries, and at the end of each capillary is associated with a cup shaped end of a tube, like a tube, which collects the filtered urine. Okay, and so these capillaries, so cup shaped tubules, are called as nephrons, and these nephrons are usually associated in collecting or reabsorbing materials like glucose, amino acids, salts and water. So water is absorbed depending upon how much amount of water is present in excess, and it is absorbed and sent back to the body. So basically after absorbing, the remaining excretory substance is transferred through urinary ureters into the urinary bladder and finally excreted out through urethra. So this is how excretion takes place in the excretory system. Okay, so how does excretion takes place in case of plants? So usually excretion takes place by these methods or these processes like transpiration. In case of plants, transpiration takes place when they need to lose some water, or during photosynthesis they also transfer oxygen as a waste product. We have seen in the earlier videos, so please do watch that videos. They also store food in or the waste products in cellular vacuoles, and they also shed off the waste products in the form of dead leaves, and some of the waste products are excreted, like in case of resin and gums, which is found in old xylem. They also transfer the excretory waste into the soil which is around them. So these are the various methods by which plants lose the excretion or transfer the waste products out of their body. So this is all about life process. If you like the video, do like, share and subscribe. And one more important thing, if I make a mistake, please do correct me, and if you have any doubt, please do comment in the comment section. Okay.